She showed up on our porch again. Clipboard in hand, fake pearls choking her neck, and that sour lemon look she always wore like war paint. Her name? Beverly. Beverly Whitmore, head of the Oakcrest HOA. If you've ever met a woman who thinks her lawn is more important than your rights, that's her. She's the kind of middle-aged power tripper who measures her self-worth in citations and passive-aggressive newsletters. I'm Preston. My sister, Zaylee, moved in with me 6 months ago after a car accident left her in a wheelchair. She's 29, sharp as a tack, and doesn't take pity. The ramp I added to the front of our house. HOA compliant, built by a licensed contractor and absolutely necessary. But Beverly, she treated it like I'd installed a helipad. This, she said, poking the railing with her pen like it personally offended her, wasn't approved by the architectural committee. I crossed my arms. Beverly, it's a medical ramp. You don't need architectural approval for federally protected accommodations, she huffed. You submitted no plans. No renderings, that's a violation. No, it's not, I said calmly because I'd already looked it up. Federal law trumps your power trip. Beverly blinked like I'd slapped her. We'll see about that. She marched off, heels clacking like castanets on the concrete, and that's when it started. First came the letters, non-compliance. Ramp not in harmony with community aesthetic. Fine, $300. Then came the visits. She'd walk by slow, staring at Zaylee like she was a code violation. Zaylee started closing the blinds during the day. One night, I came home from work and found a notice duct taped to our door. Ramp to be removed within 7 days or legal action will commence. Zaylee rolled up behind me, holding her service dog's leash. She's not gonna stop, is she? I shook my head. Not until someone makes her. So I did what any decent brother would do. I started building a legal case. I documented everything, every letter, every threat, every time Beverly stepped onto our property without permission. I installed a Ring cam, caught her taking pictures of Zaylee through the window. I even recorded her telling another board member that wheelchairs don't belong on front porches. Then, last Tuesday, Zaylee got served. An actual process server handed her a lawsuit Oakcrest HOA vs. Zaylee. Their claim, exterior modification without board approval. They were suing her for $5,000 and demanding the ramp be torn down. Zaylee looked up at me, her eyes wide, her voice quiet. She's really doing this, she said. I nodded. Yeah, but so are we. I didn't go to a lawyer. I went straight to the state attorney's office. I'd already compiled a binder of evidence. HOA violations, harassment, retaliation against a disabled resident. I filed a formal complaint under the Fair Housing Act. 3 days later, I got a call. Mr. Tolley, the investigator said, you're not the first person to complain about this HOA, but you might be the last straw. The investigator's name was Daniel Ruiz. He didn't waste time. By the following Monday, he and a colleague from the Civil Rights Enforcement Division were standing in our kitchen, both of them flipping through my binder like it was a murder file. Daniel glanced up. She really said this to your neighbor. That wheelchairs don't belong on porches, Zaylee nodded. She didn't even lower her voice. I was watering the succulents. She looked me right in the eye when she said it. Daniel made a note. The other investigator, a woman named Ray, was already downloading the video clips we'd saved to a flash drive. Her brow furrowed when she reached the one where Beverly leaned over our flower bed, camera in hand, muttering something about cleaning up the neighborhood. That clip had audio. She'd been referring to Zaylee's medical ramp. Daniel asked, has she ever entered your property without permission? I pointed at the binder. Page 17. She crossed the property line 3 times in 1 week. I placed boundary markers. She stepped over them every time. Ray raised an eyebrow. Did you ever confront her directly? Zaylee answered before I could. Once. After she left a note under my windshield wiper about how temporary disabilities don't justify permanent eyesores, I asked her to stop leaving things on my car. She told me I should be grateful she hadn't called code enforcement yet. Daniel muttered something under his breath and closed the binder. All right. We're opening an investigation under the Fair Housing Amendments Act. Based on what we've seen so far, this qualifies as targeted discrimination. And since she's an elected HOA board member, it may also fall under abuse of governance. He handed me a card. We'll need copies of everything you've got. And I'd advise keeping your security system running 24/7. They left 20 minutes later, but the atmosphere in the house stayed tense. Not fearful, charged, Zaylee sat on the couch, her fingers tapping against the armrest. What do you think she's going to do when she finds out? I didn't have to guess long. That Thursday, I came home to find a landscaping crew digging in our front yard. I slammed the truck door and jogged over. Hey. What are you doing? One of the workers, a guy in his 50s with a clipboard and a neon vest, looked up. We got a work order from Oakcrest HOA, said this area was scheduled for turf replacement. I stared at the churned-up grass around our ramp. This is private property, he scratched his head. They said the easement covered it. No, I said, pulling out my phone, it doesn't. I pulled up the plat map I'd saved months ago. This is my parcel. The easement stops 10 feet before the ramp. The foreman frowned, took a look, and stepped back. Well, hell, I don't want a trespassing charge. We'll pack it up. They loaded their gear and drove off. I recorded the whole thing from their arrival to their retreat. That night, I sent the footage to Daniel. The next morning, Ray called. We're adding unauthorized property interference to the complaint. If she's using HOA funds to send crews onto private property, that could constitute misuse of community resources. That was when the real shift began. A notice went out to every house in Oakcrest. A subpoena. The state attorney's office was demanding all HOA meeting minutes, financial records, and decision logs from the past 3 years. That's when our neighbors started talking. First, it was Mrs. Juneau across the street. She came over with a plate of lemon bars and an apology. I didn't know she was doing all that, she said, eyes glassy. She told us your ramp was some kind of unpermitted urban structure, said it was lowering property values. I should have known better. Then the Vaclavs next door came forward. Their teenage son had been fined last year for excessive porch loitering. Zaylee remembered the incident. He'd been playing guitar on the steps. The fine had been $300. She said if we didn't pay, Mr. Vaclav told me, she'd report us for running a boarding house. We didn't even know that was a thing. I asked if they had documentation. They did. By Sunday, I had a folder of neighbor testimonies, each one painting a picture of Beverly's reign as a petty tyrant with a personal vendetta against anything she couldn't control. I passed it all to Daniel. The following Tuesday, things escalated. Daniel called me. We found something. What kind of something? Financial irregularities. HOA dues being funneled into personal accounts, payments to a landscaping company that doesn't exist. We're referring this to the district attorney's office. I sat down slowly. That's embezzlement. At minimum, he said. We're also freezing the HOA's discretionary fund while we investigate. Within 48 hours, the Oakcrest HOA website went offline. The monthly newsletter vanished from inboxes. And Beverly, she stopped walking her dog, stopped driving her usual loop around the cul-de-sac. Her porch light stayed off. The decorative flags came down, but it wasn't over. The day before the emergency HOA meeting, Zaylee got a letter. Official letterhead, no return address. Inside was a single typed sentence, "Some people don't belong here." She didn't show me right away. I found it torn in half on the kitchen counter. When I asked, she just said, "She's not going to scare me." I added it to the file anyway. The emergency meeting was held in the Oakcrest Community Center. It was standing room only. Daniel attended. So did a deputy from the sheriff's office. And so did Beverly. She came in late, wearing heels that clicked across the tile like a warning bell. She carried a manila folder and wore a carefully curated smile that didn't reach her eyes. Daniel stood first. "I'm here on behalf of the state attorney's office. We are conducting an active investigation into potential violations of the Fair Housing Act, misuse of HOA funds, and criminal harassment. There was a ripple through the crowd. Beverly's mouth tightened. One by one, residents stood up, the Vaclavs, the Junos. Even old Mr. Klein, who rarely left his house, shuffled up to the microphone and talked about how Beverly had threatened to fine him for planting native shrubs. When it was my turn, I didn't bring notes. I just spoke. My sister didn't ask for special treatment. She asked for access to her own home. And because of that, she was targeted, harassed, and sued with HOA money. That's not governance. That's cruelty. I stepped back, heart pounding, and saw Beverly rise slowly, her folder clutched in both hands. This, she said, is a witch hunt. I did what was necessary to maintain the integrity of this neighborhood. If some people don't understand the rules, they shouldn't live here. No one clapped. Someone coughed. Daniel turned to the deputy and nodded. The officer approached her calmly. "Ma'am, you're being served with a court summons and a notice of investigation into financial misconduct. You are advised not to leave the county." Beverly's hands trembled as she took the envelope. That was the last time she ever stood at a meeting podium. The next day, an interim board was formed. Daniel stayed in touch, and Ray confirmed that the district attorney had opened a formal case. Charges were pending. As for Zaylee, she started leaving the blinds open again. The ramp stayed exactly where it was. Flowers bloomed along its edge. And the only camera pointed at our house was ours. Justice wasn't just a word anymore. It was a ramp solid, necessary, and unmovable. The weeks following the emergency meeting moved with a strange tension, like the neighborhood was holding its breath. Beverly's porch sat empty, her car didn't move, and her mailbox began to overflow. Rumors whispered down the sidewalk. Some said she'd skipped town, others claimed she was holed up consulting a lawyer. But the truth was worse. Deputy Carradine, the same officer who had handed Beverly her summons, returned one afternoon in an unmarked cruiser. I was out front adjusting the irrigation timer when he stepped out. "You got a minute, Preston?" I stood, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Sure." He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "You might want to be aware we executed a search warrant at Beverly's residence this morning." I blinked. "You're kidding." He shook his head. "Found shredded documents in her fireplace, external hard drives hidden behind drywall in her closet." She'd removed the insulation and reinstalled it, like she was prepping for a purge. A sharp churn twisted in my gut. "What was on the drives?" "Still being analyzed," he said, but the preliminary scan flagged spreadsheets linked to multiple personal bank accounts. More than 20. All under different names. Some of them trace back over 6 years. I stared at him. "Is that what I think it is?" "Looks like a long-term embezzlement ring. She's been siphoning HOA funds into dummy accounts through fake landscaping invoices. Even worse, there's evidence she forged signatures on several board documents, including legal complaints." I exhaled hard. "So the lawsuit against Zaylee, filed using fraudulent authorization, the board never voted on it. She forged their names." That hit like a brick. Zaylee had been dragged through a legal storm by a woman who faked an entire board consensus. And she wasn't the only victim, Carradine continued. "We're moving to charge her with identity fraud, forgery, misuse of public funds, and civil rights violations. Possibly racketeering if the financial trail supports it." I stepped back, letting that settle. She always acted like she was above everyone. Turns out she was just hiding behind all of us. "She's not hiding anymore," he said. "She's in custody." That night, Zaylee and I sat on the back deck with mugs of tea, the air thick with honeysuckle and tension. "She forged legal documents," she said, staring at the dark horizon. "That's not just harassment, that's criminal conspiracy." "She did it to keep power," I said. "And to cover her tracks. This wasn't about the ramp. That was just the excuse." Zaylee nodded slowly. "How do you even begin to clean up after something like that?" The answer came faster than expected. 2 days later, the interim board called a town hall, not a meeting, an open forum. Every resident was invited. No agendas, no Robert's rules, Just a microphone, a moderator, and a giant projector displaying scanned documents from the evidence pile. We arrived early. The community center was packed. Folding chairs stretched wall to wall, and neighbors stood along the back walls, arms crossed, eyes focused. The moderator, a retired judge named Marion O'Connell, stepped forward. "Tonight, you're going to see what was done in your name and what wasn't." She clicked the remote. Page after page appeared on the screen. Fake invoices, duplicate checks, correspondence between Beverly and a man named Dwayne Peters, a contractor she'd claimed was in charge of neighborhood beautification. Turns out Dwayne didn't exist. His listed address was an abandoned strip mall. Then came the forged minutes from board meetings that never happened. One document approved a lien against a homeowner for decorative clutter, a term Beverly had made up to fine a single mother for a swing set. Her signature was at the bottom, along with 4 others. All fake, Zaylee leaned over. "She built a paper empire. And now it's burning," I whispered. Then Marion brought up the lawsuit against Zaylee. This complaint was filed under the pretense of board consensus. However, 2 of the signatories were not even in the state at the time this document was allegedly approved. One was hospitalized. The other was attending a funeral in Oregon. Neither gave consent. Murmurs swept the room. No one interrupted. No one needed to. The truth was louder than outrage, Marion continued. The ramp in question was fully compliant with both state and federal disability access codes. The HOA had no legal standing to oppose its existence. The lawsuit was not just unethical, it was illegal. A woman in the front row stood up. "So what happens now?" "Beverly Whitmore has been arrested," Marion said plainly. "She is facing multiple felony charges. The district attorney's office is preparing a formal indictment. In the meantime, the HOA board will undergo a full audit. New elections will be held under third-party supervision." Another man raised his hand. "What about the money she stole?" Marion nodded. "Asset recovery is in progress. Investigators have frozen all accounts tied to her financial trail. Some funds may be unrecoverable, but any restitution retrieved will be redistributed proportionally to affected residents." That earned a few quiet claps, not celebration, just relief. Afterward, a line formed by the microphone. One by one, people shared stories. A widow fined for having a bird feeder. A couple cited for excessive driveway use. A veteran accused of unauthorized flag placement. Each story added another layer to Beverly's legacy, not just corruption but cruelty masked as order. When Zaylee finally rolled up to the mic, the room fell silent. "My name is Zaylee Tolley. I didn't grow up here. I moved in with my brother after I lost the ability to walk. I didn't expect a parade. I didn't expect pity, but I also didn't expect to become a target." She paused, her voice steady. "Let me be clear, this isn't about me. It's about every person who was told to shrink themselves to make someone else feel in control. It's about every neighbor who stayed quiet because they thought they were alone. You weren't." Several people nodded. Someone near the back whispered, "Damn right," Zaylee continued. "We deserve a community that defends its people, not polices them, that values fairness over appearances. And from what I've seen tonight, I think we're ready to build that." She rolled back to her seat. A man I didn't recognize gave her a nod as she passed. The town hall ended with a vote unanimous approval for a full restructuring of the HOA. No more unchecked authority. No more closed-door decisions. All financial decisions would require 2/3 approval and be posted publicly. A week later, the first public records request went live. 2 weeks after that, Beverly was formally indicted on 13 counts, including felony fraud, civil rights violations, and grand theft. Her bail was denied due to flight risk. The neighborhood kept changing. Zaylee started a community accessibility initiative, helping other residents file for modifications without fear of retaliation. The Vaclavs offered to host monthly block socials in their backyard. Even Mrs. Juno, who once avoided eye contact, now waved every time she passed. But my favorite moment came one afternoon when Zaylee was painting the new mural on the side of the community center, a bright splash of color depicting a garden ramp winding up into a blooming tree. A little girl from down the street, maybe 6 years old, walked up and stared. "Is that a roller coaster?" she asked. Zaylee grinned. "Kind of. It's the kind you ride to freedom." The girl giggled and ran back to her mom. Zaylee dipped her brush in blue and added a swirl to the sky. No flags, no fines, no fear, just paint, purpose, and the promise of something better. The first sign that things were really shifting came in the form of a folded flyer wedged into our mailbox, not a threat this time, but an announcement. Bold blue text declared, "Community Rebuilding Forum, Accountability, Healing, and Moving Forward." Below it, the names of 3 newly elected HOA board members were printed. All of them were residents. I recognized people who had spoken up during the town hall, who had been quietly observing for years while Beverly ran unchecked. Zaylee turned the paper over. "They're holding it in the elementary school auditorium," she said. "Bigger space," I replied. "Bigger message." That Saturday, we arrived to find the parking lot full. Lawn chairs were set up outside for overflow. Inside, the stage lights illuminated a long table where the new board sat. No suits, no closed folders, no guarded expressions. Just open laptops and a community of people who'd finally found their voice. A woman named Alyssa took the mic. She was a nurse, a mother of 2, and the board's new president. Her voice was steady but carried an edge of urgency. "We can't erase what happened," she said. "But we can make sure it never happens again. Transparency isn't optional anymore. It's the foundation." She clicked a button on her tablet, and a projection appeared behind her, an itemized breakdown of every HOA expenditure over the past 5 years. Each entry was linked to receipts, scanned checks, and bank statements. The audience leaned forward. This wasn't a presentation, it was an unveiling. Zaylee nudged me. "They're cracking it open." The third row reacted audibly when a payment of $7,200 surfaced. It had been labeled Storm Drain Landscaping, but the listed contractor, Green Horizon Services, had no business license and no physical address. Another name that didn't exist. Another layer of the scheme. Alyssa didn't flinch. "We've turned everything over to the forensic auditors assigned by the district attorney's office. Beverly wasn't working alone. We have confirmation that 2 former board members, now living out of state, signed off on multiple falsified invoices. Criminal referrals have been submitted." A man near the aisle stood. "Is the HOA liable for damages done under her leadership?" "We're working with a legal mediator to determine restitution," Alyssa replied. "Part of our budget will be allocated for settlements. But we're also lobbying to change how HOAs operate statewide." The problem wasn't just Beverly. It was the power structure that let her hide. A second woman stepped up to the mic. Sandra, a retired public defender and the new compliance officer. She brought receipts of her own, literally. She held up a plastic file box. "These are resident complaints that were lost over the past 3 years," she said. "Some of these were never opened. We found them in Beverly's garage during the warrant search, stuffed in a box labeled nuisance mail." Zaylee's mouth tightened. Sandra opened one envelope at random. "This one's from a resident who reported a gas leak near the retention pond. It was never addressed. No follow-up. No safety alert. That's neglect, plain and simple." It made sense now why so many seemingly minor problems had gone unresolved. Electrical outages ignored, streetlight outages dismissed, pest control requests shelved. The board hadn't just been corrupt, they'd been dangerous. After the forum, we stayed behind to talk with some of the new board. Zaylee asked Alyssa about the timeline for restitution, and I brought up the idea of a neighborhood watch, but not the usual kind. One focused on advocacy, not policing. Alyssa nodded. "That's already in the works. We're calling it the Oak Crest Justice Circle. Monthly gatherings, public minutes, open task forces. Nobody gets to hide behind closed doors anymore." The next few weeks moved quickly. Zaylee was invited to speak at a state legislative hearing about HOA reform. She wore a navy blazer and rolled into the chamber beside 3 other advocates, representing different stories: an elderly couple who'd been fined for installing solar panels, a veteran whose service dog had been banned from the clubhouse, and a single father who'd been accused of noise pollution because his child practiced piano. When Zaylee's turn came, she didn't read from a script. She spoke plainly, her voice clear. "I'm not here because I want to be, I'm here because I had to be. When our ramp went up, I thought the fight would be about paperwork. But it wasn't, it was about dignity. No one should have to justify their existence every time they enter their home." The committee chair leaned forward. "What do you believe would have stopped this from happening?" She didn't hesitate. "Mandatory oversight, annual audits, a state ombudsman for HOA complaints, and criminal prosecution when abuse of power becomes deliberate harm." The room was silent for a moment. Then a murmur of agreement swept through the chamber. By that evening, her speech had gone viral on the state legislature's website. Comments poured in, people recognizing themselves in her story. Others asking how to start similar reforms in their neighborhoods. Back home, the ripple effects continued. The sheriff's department confirmed that Beverly's case would go to trial. She'd been denied bail again, and her co-conspirators had been extradited. The charges now included obstruction of justice and conspiracy to commit fraud. The DA's office contacted Zaylee directly. They wanted her impact statement for the sentencing phase. She wrote it in one sitting. No edits. No rewrites. "I'm not angry," she said when she handed me the final draft. "I just want the court to understand what it means to be made invisible." The trial date arrived under heavy media scrutiny. Cameras lined the courthouse steps. Journalists whispered outside the courtroom. But inside, it wasn't a circus. It was quiet, focused, methodical. Evidence was presented over 5 days. Financial records, digital correspondence, sworn affidavits from nearly 24 residents. Every lie, every theft, every act of intimidation, it all came to light. On day 6, the jury returned its verdict, guilty. On all counts. The judge didn't mince words during sentencing. "This court finds your actions to be a calculated abuse of authority carried out over years and under the guise of community stewardship. You weaponized bureaucracy against your neighbors, exploited positions of trust for personal gain, and targeted vulnerable individuals with malicious intent." She was sentenced to 18 years in state prison, with parole eligibility after 12. Restitution was ordered in the amount of $86,000, every cent traced and accounted for. Outside the courthouse, the neighborhood gathered, not to celebrate but to witness. To mark the moment when fear stopped dictating policy, Zaylee stood beside me, her expression unreadable. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "It's not about her anymore, it's about what we do next." That night, we hosted a gathering in our front yard. There was no formal invitation, it just happened. Neighbors brought lawn chairs, someone dragged out a Bluetooth speaker, and someone else lit citronella candles in mason jars. Zaylee painted tiny symbols on the sidewalk with chalk ramps, flowers, open gates. A girl from down the block asked if she could help, and soon they were both sketching a mural that stretched from our driveway to the sidewalk. People didn't talk about Beverly. They talked about what they could build now. A community garden, a resource exchange for elderly residents, a volunteer team to help with accessibility upgrades, and for the first time since we moved in, the porch light didn't feel like a beacon for surveillance. It felt like home. The next morning, a new sign appeared at the entrance to Oak Crest, wooden, hand-carved and painted by volunteers. It read, "Oak Crest, a community of access, accountability, and respect. No slogans, no fine print, just a promise. And this time, one that would be kept."